happy now to introduce the people who are going to act as moderators for today's panel. And given that this is a program about the future of social innovation and how do we empower young change makers, we thought no better people to moderate that discussion than two of our best and brightest change agents from here at UNH. So I'm going to introduce those two now. So want to first introduce Ilona Drew. Ilona really represents our joint venture between the Paul College of Business and Economics and the Carsey School of Public Policy. She graduated from Paul College with a degree in business administration in 2014. And after some brief work experience, she came back here to get her master's in public policy at the Carsey School. She'll be graduating next May, so if anyone's looking for a great hire, Ilona's your girl. Also, really excitingly, Ilona is a past winner of the Social Venture Innovation Challenge, which she'll tell you more about. I'm also really thrilled to welcome back to UNH Austin Perea. Austin graduated from the Paul College of Business and Economics in 2013, where he was one of our top graduating students. After spending several years at the Boston Consulting Group, he is now an analyst in the renewable energy field at Green Tech Media. So Austin and Ilona, thanks for being back, and we look forward to hearing from you today. Come on up.
All right, as Fiona said, my name is Ilona Drew. I started here at Paul College for my undergraduate. In 2014, I graduated. Before that, I had to pick my last elective for my last senior year and ended up in Fiona Wilson's class. And it was really fortuitous because I had had trouble kind of aligning my career goals with my personal values and passions. So that year, I actually entered the second annual Social Venture Innovation Challenge with a social venture that addressed food waste and food insecurity. And I became a finalist. I actually was a placed winner and then graduated. And immediately went into a job as an analyst in corporate finance for a semiconductor company. So as interesting as that sounds, and as much as I learned, I quickly realized that it didn't really align with my passions either. So I was excited to hear about the new program here at the Carsey School, Masters in Public Policy. And I thought that might be a good way to kind of recommit to my values and further my potential career in social innovation. Since I returned to UNH, I basically eat, sleep, and breathe the Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise. I was a graduate research fellow last year, working for the Social Sector Franchise Initiative. That opportunity afforded me the ability to actually travel to Rwanda last January to look at a new social enterprise that is really kind of revolutionizing the way that people are accessing clean, affordable drinking water in East Africa. So that was really amazing. Then I spent my summer actually at PAX World with Joe, working on looking at gender equity metrics and financial outcomes for top performing firms. And now I'm back with CSIE as a program assistant, helping 5 student research fellows who I think most of which are in here actually as they prepare to go look at their own social ventures across the globe in January. So I just wanted to say thank you to Fiona for all the opportunities and everyone at the Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise. It's really shaped my direction, my career, and given me kind of just some personal alignment between what I'm going to be doing and what I love. So thank you.
As Fiona mentioned, my name's Austin Perea, and I graduated in 2013, but took a slightly different path than Ilona. I actually came in as a political science major, and really fantastic program, but it wasn't really until later on in my career that I realized that while political science was really good at basically presenting me and giving me the skills to kind of analyze the problems that were going on in places. I had a particular focus in the Middle East. It wasn't as good at actually providing practical solutions for how to address some of these fundamental issues of income inequality and economic development. And so my junior year, actually, I took a class on microfinance, which I think at the time I thought was going to be on microeconomics. And then I realized upon taking it that I was not learning about indifference curves and economic trade-offs. I was learning about economic development and, actually giving, loans to the unbanked population in order to build them up capital and build up assets in order to get themselves out of poverty. And so that was really the first time that I had the opportunity to recognize that there could be market-based solutions to these very fundamental social and economic problems. And so after that, I kind of had a fire under me. I really wanted to engage in social innovation. The next semester, I actually went to DC for an internship in a much more kind of classical political science role. I was looking at national security policy and defense policy, but the whole time my heart was kind of thinking about economic development and thinking about how ways in which that you could actually affect social change through market-based models. So I was lucky that when Professor Swack, who led the microfinance class, actually sent out an email about the social innovation internship, which I believe was in its second year at that point. And I was lucky enough to get placed at Pax World Investments, also with Joe. So I learned a lot about ESG investment, did research on sustainability, looking mostly at, I think, industrial good companies and compliance with EPA regulations, if I recall correctly. And that kind of really set the tone for the rest of my career. After that, I was lucky enough to actually get placed in the Atkins Investment Group, which is a student-run investment club over at Paul College, as an ESG investment analyst. So we integrated that into our equity-based presentations. We did financial analysis, but we also incorporated sustainability analysis and looked at kind of risk management and got the whole group thinking about sustainability and its place in investments. And that in itself was an amazing experience and actually helped me get a research grant to actually focus more on microfinance. I spent 2 months in the Middle East, initially in Egypt, but unfortunately Egypt had different plans. They had a coup d'etat in 2013, and I had to get evacuated to Jordan. So it was a good time, but definitely not in the plans initially, but learned a lot about Islamic banking and Islamic microfinance. And that was instrumental in helping me get my first job as an energy research analyst at Boss Consulting Group. And then I wanted to kind of narrow my focus and delve more into clean energy and renewables. And so now I'm a clean tech, solar, specifically a distributed solar energy analyst at Green Tech Media in the research and analysis department. And recently, kind of coming full circle from my experience as a student, where I worked on helping the UNH Foundation establish an ESG sustainable investment sleeve, I'm now on the Committee for Investment Responsibility that is going to be helping kind of guide the sustainability strategy and the ESG strategy for our UNH Foundation, UNH Endowment. So happy to be here, and thank you, obviously, to the Center for Social Innovation for all the work that it's done. It's been super impactful in my own career, and I owe a lot of my own success to the programs here. But enough about me. I want to go ahead and introduce our first panelist and get started with the panel. So Paul Bradley is the president of Rock USA. Paul was our very first Social Innovator of the Year in 2013. He is a proud UNH alumnus, graduated from the Whittemore School of Business Economics, now the Paul School. Paul has dedicated his career to using the tools of business and economics for positive social impact, both in his early career at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, where he helped lead the creation of a pioneering model to make quality home ownership viable for low and fixed income populations. And more recently, his role leading Rock USA, the nonprofit which is helping scale the model incubated here in the New Hampshire nationwide to over 200 communities in 14 states. And I was lucky enough to actually see some of that during my time at the Carsey Social Innovation Internship. So welcome, Paul.
And next, we'd like to welcome Eric Schwartz. He was our 2014 Social Innovator of the Year. Eric is the founder of the Citizen Schools and co-founder of the College for Social Innovation. At the time that he was our social innovator, he had just stepped down as co-founder and CEO of Citizen School, a highly successful social enterprise that he scaled from a small Boston-based program to a national nonprofit with $30 million annual budget that has made a tangible positive impact on the after-school and extended learning time fields across the United States. Today, he is the co-founder and CEO of the new College for Social Innovation, which, through their innovative Semester in the City program, is helping to educate and inspire the next generation of social problem solvers. UNH is thrilled and proud to have a major partnership with Eric and the College for Social Innovation. Starting next year, students from any university in the country will be able to participate in the Semester in the City program through UNH. So thank you very much, and come on up, Eric.
And also welcoming to the stage, Joe Keefe, Chief Executive Officer and my former boss at Pax World Investments. Joe was our Social Innovator of the Year last year. Under Joe's leadership, Pax World Management has become one of the leading sustainable investment firms, integrating environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG, factors into the investment analysis and portfolio construction of all its funds. His voice has helped change the field to champion both sustainable investing and women's empowerment, and his influence has been felt across the globe. Among his many other accomplishments, he was named by the Financial Times in 2015 as one of the top 10 feminists of the world. So welcome, Joe.
And finally, although at this point she may not need an introduction, we'd like to welcome Clara Miller, the president of the Herren Foundation. As most of you heard earlier this morning, Clara is widely recognized as one of the most innovative and influential people in the social change field, both in her current role at the Herren Foundation and then previously with her leadership in the Nonprofit Finance Fund. We are proud to count Clara as a UNH alumna, and thrilled that we can honor her as the 2017 Social Innovator of the Year. Welcome.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started then. So, as the first topic of conversation, so this is specifically for Clara and Paul, but happy to have other people kind of join in answering this question. But each of you has dedicated your career in various fields and in various ways to using the tools of business and public policy specifically to help address some of the society's most pressing challenges and to make the tools of social innovation more mainstream in today's economy. So I'll start with you, Clara. From your vantage point, working more in social justice and poverty, what do you see as the most exciting and important trend in social innovation? And also, what are the major challenges and opportunities ahead for this space?
So as we know, technology is a blessing and a curse. And I think technology holds some real opportunities to make to basically do what is called, I think, oh God, I can't remember. Basically, innovate. What am I doing wrong? Oh, my nose. To do kind of innovation in a mass scale, to provide ways that people who wouldn't ordinarily have opportunity get it. It also is disintermediating traditional markets faster than we can turn around. So it is this kind of opportunity and curse, I think, is technology. And I think it's incumbent on us to find ways to connect people, communities, and others left out of the technological revolution to all of the good that it could do, especially in this country, which is I think, suffering mightily.
Well, I'll start off with the challenge, which of course, in Clara's comments earlier today, in the Herren's mission really focused on wealth and income gaps in the country and around the world that are, of course, widening at increasing rates of speed. But in addition to, for America, I think there's a cultural angst and an eroding of economic security that is very troublesome. Our work is in a very targeted market. We help homeowners in mobile home parks buy their parks as cooperatives, an opportunity for the 2.7 million largely low-income homeowners that actually own their home but rent the land to take ownership and control of the land underneath their homes. The last election, while I don't want to make a political point, had a very interesting note to it. In March of 2016, the New York Times reported that the third highest correlation of Trump voters were in fact owners of mobile homes. And for us, working in low-income communities with homeowners and helping them gain security, we're day-to-day working in these very communities. And I can tell you that the angst is great, and the lack of security is tremendous. And we could debate whether the arrow was shot at the right target or not, but the reality is that people are looking for answers. And so I think as social innovators, the challenge is really on us to be much more effective and go much deeper in low-income neighborhoods to help people gain the security that they're looking for by working with them. And for that, I think what we need desperately in our niche, but also broadly in the social innovation space, are very bright young people with ideas, with information and access to technologies that us old school bucks grasp at wantingly, but also with true community organizing skills, people that are willing to listen in neighborhoods that they might not otherwise find themselves socially or naturally, and do a very effective job of translating those frustrations into real change that really impacts how people live and the experience that they have in the US economy.
Thank you both. Eric and Joe, you sit in slightly different fields, so I'd be interested to hear what your perspective of the trends, challenges, or opportunities in education or in the investment world. So Eric, if you'd like to go first.
I want to say something quickly pivoting off your point about, I think, a breakdown in social capital, a breakdown in kind of connections across class and race lines and other lines. There's a sociologist named Charles Willey who I took a class with, and he talked about the power of marginal people. And at first you hear marginal people, it sounds like a terrible thing. Who wants to be a marginal person? But he said people who make change are at the margins between different groups. They have like a foot in two different groups, and they're able to translate across the mobile home owners and the non-mobile home owners as one example. And I think one of the things we're missing, and one of the things the social sector needs to find a way to provide, is more marginal people who can step into the gaps between different classes and different political viewpoints, et cetera. So that, I just wanted to build on that thought. But I think it's an incredibly exciting time in the social sector, in part because there's a lot of kind of coming together across government and private industry and the nonprofit sector. The lines are blurring, I think, in some really exciting way, and Clara, you talked about that. It's an exciting time partly because there's really big problems, and the election highlighted that, both real problems and the perception of real problems. It's also an exciting time because I think we've never made more progress against most big problems than we have in the last 1 or 2 generations. So as big as the problems are today, global extreme poverty down in my lifetime from 50% to 9%. Human rights and the ability to marry who you want to marry up, and many other measures. And it's also a really exciting time to be a problem solver or change maker because there's so many new tools, from social investment bonds to apps to great new ways to potentially bring people together. So I think it's an exciting time. I also think it's exciting because there's a lot of jobs. in the social change world. People think of it as like just Mother Teresa or volunteers or some social businesses, but 30% of all jobs in the U.S. economy are either in government or nonprofits. And the nonprofit sector, not as a share of the economy, but as a share of jobs, is growing faster than any other part of our economy. So there's big opportunities there for employment, there's big opportunities for problem solving, and I think it's a really exciting time because of the sort of turbulence that we're experiencing.
Thank you. Joe?
So two trends I would just mention that I think are very connected to this discussion, I think very connected to Clara's remarks when she received the award earlier this afternoon. One is the dysfunction and the sort of downfall of the public sector. And that is true around the world for various reasons. It's not just true here. Government is in various states of dysfunction around the world. Global governance is at a sort of a crisis point. When I was growing up, in those days, one expected any of these social problems that we're talking about, one expected a very vital public sector to be very involved in addressing them. And we don't expect that as much anymore because the public sector isn't vital. It's sort of moribund. Again, in different countries for different reasons, certainly here in the United States. But because of that, a higher set of expectations has been assigned to businesses and capital markets to step into the breach, such that there's less of a division, to your point, between enterprise and social enterprise. There's less of a division between innovation and social innovation. They must necessarily come together. And people are asking, frankly, particularly with sort of government sort of increasingly on the sidelines, people are asking capitalism to frankly do what economic systems are supposed to do. That is to create social wealth that is broadly distributed, that has a qualitative, not just a quantitative factor, and that helps solve social problems. So that's happening. Secondly, very connected to it, not all the research, but a very, very, I think, compelling body of research suggests that the fastest growing demographics in the sort of economic landscape, women and millennials, have this expectation that they want their investments, they want their money and their values aligned. They want to invest in companies that are part of the problem rather than part of the solution, I should say, instead of part of the problem. They want to be part of the solution. They want their money to be part of the solution. They want their careers to be part of the solution. They don't want to just invest in widget manufacturers. They want to invest in widget manufacturers who somehow, through the manufacture and distribution of widgets, are helping to solve global sustainability problems. They're tackling poverty. They're tackling injustice. They're tackling environmental degradation. So those sets of expectations, I think, are resulting in sort of a transformation of the whole idea of the corporation, the whole idea of what a business is supposed to do. Its only duty, as Milton Friedman once said, is not to make a profit. It has a wider set of expectations. It has a broader set of stakeholders. After the Charlottesville disaster, a few months ago, when the president made some remarks, and the next day the CEO of Merck stepped down off the president's corporate advisory council, and then a bunch of CEOs followed him. That was because they were being responsive to a broader set of stakeholders. That CEO of Merck didn't think his share price was going to fall the next day just because he stayed on the president's corporate advisory council. What he thought was that his employees expected something better of Merck, that their customers expected something better of Merck, that ultimately their shareholders and their investors were going to expect something better of Merck, that it stand for something. And that, to me, is a sea change. I don't want to be sanguine or Pollyannish, but I think that's a very positive development that's taking place right now.
One quick follow-up to that, to the earlier point. I think those are all fantastic points, but it was specifically with respect to the erosion of the public sector and the social sector specifically taking the role of that. I'm curious, and this is to all the panelists, do you think that's fundamentally a positive development? I think even I was talking to someone about the social impact bond, I think in Cambridge or Somerville, and people were saying basically this is the job of the government, like municipal government should be doing this. And I wonder if this ultimately is actually a positive development. Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I have a very strong opinion about this. No, it's not a positive development in any way, shape, or form. And to be clear on the social impact bond, social impact bonds are a capital, they're sort of a financial instrument. They're not a source of revenue. The only source of revenue for the repayment of the investors in social impact bonds is the government. And I think to paint government also with one brush as dysfunctional is untrue. There are many parts of the government, there are many local and state governments who are doing remarkable work. And we need everybody in the game here. The fantasy that somehow we're going to have a, democratic capitalism freed from the bonds of the government is idiocy.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for that.
I would,
I'm a liberal Democrat. I want more government.
well, this struck me in the past year as well, that, during the Kennedy administration, trust in government ranked 75%. So 75% of the US population had trust in government back in the 60s, and today that has plummeted to 19%. That's a fundamental problem. And and government plays a critically important role, as Clara started off saying and could go on for an hour talking about, I suspect.
Don't get me started.
And I think it's also a warning shot to nonprofits as well, because I think the general public, person on the street, you stop and ask, what is a nonprofit? And I have fellow UNH grads who have asked me later in life here, exactly what is a nonprofit and who owns it? So, person on the street doesn't necessarily know a nonprofit from forms of other public service. And so I interpret it also as a distrust in the nonprofit sector, which is troublesome to boot. So absolutely not a good trend, and we've, I would say in terms of education, never more important time in terms of the development of moral character, in the development of business leaders, how that has become second seat. Mr. Paul, in your leadership, I mean, there's just absolutely no way you can lead an organization without absolute integrity and character, and I don't understand how this speedometer has just dropped down to zero or negative, going in reverse. But
A thought I would add on this, from talking to a lot of millennials or Gen Z, young current college students, is I agree there's sort of this growing mistrust of sort of the nonprofit industrial complex, is what some people call it. There's, I think, a mistrust of a lot of big companies, and the young people I'm talking to, intrigued with sort of social businesses. What is that? How could that work? But there's actually a growing appreciation and curiosity about government, in a sense of we can't give up on it. It is so dysfunctional in some ways, particularly at the national level, but there's also amazing things. I think, as Clara said, big problems that are being solved using big data and using really innovative techniques at the local level, state level, sometimes at the federal level. And a lot of young people very curious about that and thinking about, could I build a career as a problem solver and a change maker with government? But to me, the way to make capitalism work better is to marry it with effective democracy. And I think a lot of young people are thinking about how to rebuild an effective democracy that could work with capital to drive better outcomes for all of us.
Yeah, and I definitely resonate with that. I mean, I didn't go back to school for public policy because I wanted to be in the government. It's because I wanted to understand it and figure out how to work with it. So that makes sense to me. And kind of going off of that, each of you are connected to higher education in some way. You host interns, you come to schools and talk to classes and at events. So we kind of want to talk about your hopes for us, the up-and-coming change makers in the world. So what can and what should universities like UNH do to prepare students to take up these important roles as social innovators in the future? What knowledge, tools, skills, and habits of mind do you believe social innovators of today and tomorrow need? Joe or Paul?
Well, I would start by saying that you have a tremendous example. The Peter Paul School, the Carsey School, the Center for Social Innovation, which is a joint initiative of both schools. We get remarkable interns at PAX in partnering with you. I will say this, that I would hope that more businesses would be more involved with the university. This is just an incredible university. I used to always say to friends, and I think this has changed dramatically in the last several years, that, boy, UNH is the best kept secret around. It's this great university, no one realizes how great it is. Well, I don't think it's a secret anymore. I think the word is getting out. In the area of sustainability, this university is a national leader. And so businesses like mine need to find ways to connect with you. You know, for me coming here today, I'm a CEO of a business. This is a very good use of my time. Seeing these innovators, seeing these awards, I've been a judge on the award and so forth, it's good for our business. It helps engender ideas, so it's good for us. There needs to be as many connections as there can, in my view, between your local businesses and your local institutions of higher learning. And I can tell any business leader in the audience that our partnership with UNH has done nothing but wonderful things for PACS. We've hired a ton of people out of UNH. I mean, half of our employees are probably under the age of 40, and probably half of them are out of UNH. And they've helped build a great company, so.
Excellent.
No, I'm gonna take a slightly different tack, although this is wonderful music to my ears, and say that I would say, in answer to your question, don't train people too narrowly. When Herren hires, we look for, first and foremost, critical thinking skills, flexibility, ability to look at things from different sides. It's habits of mind that are about something different from being a very well-trained, you name it. I would, I know it's the art and English major speaking in some ways, but then, I had some people who were in the sciences and so on in my family. And I discovered accounting when I got out there. So I would say encourage people to take history. I mean, I can tell you, just making sure people know history is super important. You don't have to major in it. Take art, and take music, get out there and understand. Winston Churchill had a finance minister who decided during the Blitz that he thought they should close down the ballet and the opera and so on and so forth in London. And he famously was said to have remarked, Winston Churchill that is, he said, "What do you think it is we were fighting for?" Right? So I think, in our rush to make sure we're learning all the skills, I think we have to be very careful to not forget what it is we're fighting for, and to think about it in a big picture way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Eric, in your opinion, are universities, more generally speaking, I guess outside of the realm of UNH, giving students these things, and how do you believe universities should be structuring their programs to be incorporating these elements to give students the knowledge and tools and skill sets to really excel in the social economy?
So, in a word, no. I think a couple things have happened in higher education. One is the gap between the elites that the rest of the world thinks of when they think of higher ed and the average has gotten much bigger. The gap in spending when I went to college was 3-to-1 between the top 1% and the average. Now it's 10-to-1. So there's a bigger gap happening in college. Second, I think the skills that are being built in the average college program, and I think UNH has been really innovative in what it's done, not just with Semester in the City, but a lot of other programs, are not delivering the skills that either employers or communities need. So either from a civic point of view or from a capital or commerce point of view. And the studies are really clear on this, like CEOs and hiring managers basically saying that 90% of the college graduates, not the college dropouts, but the college graduates, do not have the skills that we want to have. And it's mostly broad thinking skills. It's not they expect them to know accounting perfectly, but they don't have the critical thinking skills, et cetera. So I think college needs to be thinking much differently. And the colleges that thrive in the coming decades will be ones that think outside of the box and build a curriculum around discovery and purpose and sort of habits of mind that Clara's talking about, and integrate into it lots of chances. I mean, my bias, we've built a program around a semester in the city doing internships with heavy reflection and a lot of rigor, but study abroad, research with a professor, deep projects with your colleagues where you're working on real world issues and you're building a sense of purpose. And Stanford did this thing where the students came up with an idea of a mission, not a major, which I think is pretty radical and kind of cool. But I think, a lot of people are saying a lot of colleges are going to disappear. It's probably overblown, but it's also true. And the ones that don't disappear and that thrive will be the ones that meet the needs of their students and of the larger society, which involves developing much more of a sense of purpose, real, useful, quote, 21st century skills that will probably be built as much out of the classroom as in the classroom.
As a liberal arts major, that is music to my ears to hear that critical thinking skills are obviously critical. I mean, Paul, does that largely kind of jive with what you're seeing?
Well, unlike Eric, I'm not as fortunate to spend as much time on college campuses because what I do experience when I do get an opportunity, and it's mainly here at the University of New Hampshire, is an opportunity to interact with energetic, bright, motivated, a generation that I regard sort of as the climate change generation that's going to really is growing up in a world that they see significant consequences to how previous generations have treated Mother Earth. And so there's a lot of motivation, and it's very exciting. I always leave with a much more optimistic outlook. And to Joe's point, I think more businesses, more nonprofits need to engage in activities at the university, this being an excellent one. This room ought to be 3 or 4 times the size with many more businesses involved and many more students involved because there's real opportunity here. And so I applaud the work of the center and obviously the Peter Paul School and the Carsey Institute for making this all work.
Great. Well, we probably talk about this ad nauseum. So, but I want to open up the panel to questions from the audience. So, if anyone has any questions, start the Q&A session. Alex.
Thanks, everyone. I have a question that came up in my mind while Clara was talking on stage earlier, but Joe, you may be able to weigh in on this as well, and welcome to hear from others. As we move to define, social innovation and the kind of baseline moral compass for, what is the right thing for businesses to be doing, I'm curious for those of you that are involved in, in the investment sector, how you create your screens and where you draw your line, and whether or not there is an emerging national or international trend line for that, or if it's competing, if there's different theories around, what is the moral baseline. My biggest concern in this space, as much as I love being in this room and being part of these conversations, is that we allow large corporations that are publicly traded, that are beholden to their shareholders' interests, to kind of hide behind the marketing of the sustainable and ethical things that they do while continuing business as usual to make a bottom line dollar. And I don't want to say one way or the other what's right and what's wrong, but I'm kind of curious for those of you that are leaders in the space, what does it look like to say no to a company that is claiming sustainability metrics, but maybe you feel that they don't necessarily meet a certain line, and what is that line for you and how do you draw it? Thanks.
Oh, that's an easy one. Well, one part of the answer would be accounting is destiny. So as more of the big players come onto the field, of course, we do. You're absolutely right. Have to guard against fraud and using this as simply a marketing opportunity. So, and then if you look as far as consensus is concerned, and I would love to, Joe has to say about this too, it's an absolute scrum out there. It's data deserts and data jungles. The nonprofit sector has more measurement than any small enterprise could possibly imagine. while large public companies may or may not, they're also answering to all sorts of different stakeholder groups. And a market standard has not emerged. But there are people working on it, and there is consensus that's starting to build around various ways of not saying what's a good company, but saying how do you measure environmental, social, governance issues broadly and risk broadly. Is this not working? Oh, no, it is. It's just I'm not using it right.
It's going on and on.
Oh, okay. All right. That you can, that those are things, just like, you know, we forget that FASB was created in 1972 or something. You know, it's like as old as my college degree, but that's not that old. And those are standards for financial accounting. There is now, you know, an organization that's doing sustainability accounting standards. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of it. That is, you know, looking at, just as a baseline, what are the things that are material risks? How do you measure the positive, you know, how do you measure, those fluctuate over time. They're both positive and negative. No company is static. So figuring out how to measure that is a huge undertaking. And I'll just add before, you know, I would love to hear what Joe says, so I've got to shut up. That you can't, you really can't just say to yourself, we're going to embrace a standard that is not kind of a net contribution, as we call it at the Herren Foundation, and we're kind of struggling with this ourselves. A net contribution of any enterprise. It could be government enterprise, it could be a small nonprofit, it could be a large public company. Each one of those can make a positive net contribution or be more extractive than it is contributory. So I think it's dangerous to say scale in and of itself is going to be bad, you know, but it's an important thing to have those metrics be segmented across different legal forms of organization and size.
Yeah, I would echo what Clara said about the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, that Clara mentioned she sits on the board. That is an effort of the industry to be precisely responsive to the question you raised. And I don't think anyone is under the illusion that there's going to be one definition of sustainability or every company is going to have to adhere to a single standard. I don't think that makes sense. I think there's differences between industry and sector. There's differences between regions. What constitutes sustainability for a financial services company versus an energy company versus a consumer durables company may be different because they're focused on different issues. They have different workforce issues and so on and so forth. That's fine. I also think it's fine that there's this spectrum, and at one end of the spectrum might be companies that are doing it more as a sort of a marketing gimmick or marketing strategy, or a little bit more it's greenwashing, and at the other end of the spectrum it's companies that are really doing it authentically, systematically, they really believe in what they're doing, they really get the business case for it and so forth. But I think the fact that companies feel they have to just get on one end of the spectrum in and of itself is a positive development. And as to that spectrum, over time, let the market it'll play out. Let the market help us get to a better and better definition of sustainability. Let the companies at the top perform better, as the research seems to suggest they will do and are doing, and that will incentivize the companies at the lower end of the spectrum to improve their practices. That's how markets, again, are supposed to work, and I think that's how they can work. So I don't, sometimes I think sustainability holds itself, or some people try to hold it to a higher standard. People like Benjamin Dodd and people that define value, and the rich Warren Buffett, the richest person, one of the richest persons in the world, are known as value investors. There's no one definition of value investing. All these different portfolio managers that say they do value investing do it in very, very different ways. So sustainability shouldn't sort of back itself into a corner where it has to. And I hear a lot of people saying, well, we would love to do that, but we just can't get what your definition is. I think that's a bunch of poppycock. I think the market is figuring this out. The market is offering different strategies, different approaches, and there's a lot of ways to do it, and that's good.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you so much for a wonderful panel. Dan Weeks from Revision Energy. I have the opportunity to speak a lot about climate change, and the comment was made that my generation is the climate change generation. And while I'm very heartened by all that has been spoken in the last 45 minutes, I see that even as there is plenty of positive evidence, reason for hope about private sector and nonprofits moving in this more positive direction, it seems that the scale at which, the pace at which we are moving in a very destructive direction far outstrips the positives that are being testified to today. When we look at global investments in fossil fuels, over $1 trillion compared to a couple $100 billion in renewables, for instance. I don't know quite what my question is. I guess I wanted to put that out there and see if we can tackle a little bit more. I so appreciated the references to those nebulous, but in my view, critical factors like character, the decisions that everyday Americans and people around the world make with our dollars. There's a lot of consciousness in this room. There isn't necessarily the same in society at large. Maybe how can we as individuals be more responsible, be more catalytic toward countering these bigger, very disturbing trends, especially their climate impacts?
So I think you have two questions in there. So I'm going to answer, at least give you my opinion on both of them. One of them is what Eric was talking about, which has to do with people's ability, the marginal person, the person's ability to talk with people they don't know very well or they haven't met yet, or they're not used to hanging around with. And I think we all, everybody in this room, everybody marginal or not, have to become more marginal people and to reach out into areas which make us all uncomfortable. And we're not being encouraged by our technological gadgets to do that, but we've got to do it. The other thing, and this may, I learned this talking to somebody I know who's at Rocky Mountain Institute. And believe me, I go every day, I open my eyes and say, please give me some hope on climate. I mean, I think we all do. And he said that one of the things that those who model climate change have not factored in as, and he's on the board of Rocky Mountain Institute, so he does have some chops on this, have not factored into the climate change models as much as perhaps they could, is the rate of adoption of clean tech, which is going much faster than anybody imagined it would, supposedly, and is making greater strides than anybody imagined and is becoming more of there's much more market uptake than was originally modeled into the climate change models. That's all I got on climate change. It's a little bit optimistic.
I'd love to build on that and then get back to a question you raised, Alina, around just advice to your generation. We, in our Wednesday evening seminar last week, watched Al Gore's newest TED Talk on climate change. Inconvenient truth was a very negative view, and the new one is there's huge problems. And to Clara's point, there's actually huge progress, much faster than expected on wind, solar. The investment actually, I think, is bigger than the investment, the sort of new private investment in fossil fuels. So there's that's one source, just if you look it up, and there's others, I think. But the broader point, I think we are losing in this difficult political environment any sense of optimism. And when we lose that, we decrease our chances of making progress on the issues of the day. And we make it more likely that we just say, forget it, give up on it. And there's a lot of reasons, despite all the very real, brutal facts and real challenges, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. I gave a couple just around dramatic reduction in worldwide poverty and dramatic increase in human rights, but there's 10 others that you could list. And we need to find a way to find those data sources and spread the word. Because, a lot of the reason where we are losing ground, a lot of the reason we're losing ground is people are losing hope. And so I think one of the biggest things your generation has to do is be troubadours for possibility. And it doesn't mean you're happy talk, and it's really about rooting it in data, but you've got to be rigorous at adopting a cast of mind and say, well, I'm going to look for the positives and not ignore the brutal facts, but look for the positives and tell stories about possibility. Because I think that's what Gore has come to. If you just scare people about climate change, it's not going to work. That's a piece of the puzzle. But you have to tell a story of possibility rooted in facts that gives us a possibility, gives human nature a chance to move forward.
The urban writer, a theorist, Jane Jacobs, once said, I'm an optimist about possibilities and a pessimist about probabilities, which I think goes a little bit to the heart of your question. And the fact of the matter is, if we continue on our current course on climate, the probabilities are not good. So we literally have to change the arc, and we have to consciously intervene and reshape the global economy, reshape human society in ways that change that arc. So if everyone in this room continue to live your life the way you're living it now, and if everyone in every other room continued to do the same, we would not change the arc, and the probabilities would overwhelm us. So we really do have to become optimists and believe that because of the possibilities there, what we can do, what technology can do, what human cooperation can do, all of the various strategies that we can change this arc. I don't think there's any doubt that we can, but we're not doing really well right now, so we have to considerably up our game. And I think all of us just have to sort of understand that at a profound level, that we literally have to change the way we live to get this done.
As a solar energy analyst, I would be remiss if I didn't add some data to this conversation. But I do think there is reason to be optimistic, just to echo what you're saying. In 2016, at least in the US, solar accounted for the largest share of new generating facilities. That beat out natural gas, that beat out coal, that also beat out wind. So there is a lot of progress that's being made by the market. Granted, that probably won't happen in 2017. In fact, it definitely won't, which is partly a function of the political environment, the political context we live in. But there's been a lot of progress, and I think it's important to note that. But so that's going to be it for the panel. Thank you, our panelists, for joining us. Excellent panel. And I'd like to